Good afternoon. It's Monday night, 8 o'clock. It's that time. Dialogue with Dozell. Hello, Dozell land. Hope everybody's doing all right tonight. Glad to be back in the seat tonight. It's that time of year when I'm gone quite a bit, and thank God for Jan and Kim and the Toyas, the team Toyas, for the takeovers that they do for us and everything to keep the show adrift. We've never missed a Monday night in 3 years. How about that? We've had some reruns, but we've never missed a show. We're so glad and we're so grateful to our loyal audience here in Dozell land. Hey, tonight, scheduled in with us is State Senator, doctor, preacher, well-rounded, recovering. I'm going to let her tell all of that story. Dr. Rosalind Osgood is going to be with us. Now, what has happened is Dr. Osgood was overbooked, and she did not know, but it is her intention to be with us at least by the midway point. At that point, if she's not, we may recalculate the show and bring her back on, because we want an hour with Dr. Osgood for all that she does and all that she makes happen in our community. And her story in itself is compelling enough. A lot of stuff going on. There's a certain president that, KV is not with us tonight. He will probably be seeing lesser and lesser of him because of his new assignment. And I'm going to let him come on and tell you about it. I think we've got it booked in here next week, week after next. We're having two brothers. One of them, Calvin Thomas, has been on before. A returned citizen. Calvin was actually on death row, and in just minutes, hours from his sentence being carried out, execution, and he was he got a stay of the execution and was ultimately released from prison after 40-some years. And Kim assisted him in authoring a book. And I have since befriended a friend who was in federal prison, and there were found some inadequacies, legalities with this case. And when he was released, a whole lot of brothers were released because he stood up to the federal government, and they found technicalities that they were all released. And he also wrote a book, and I'm in the process of reading his book. And what I want to do is have the two of them come on. I think that show is scheduled for week after next. And you heard Calvin talk about his case. We won't talk as much about the case. What I want to talk about is the construction of the book, chronicling everything that happened, and how you actually take time to put a book together, and the process of getting people to assist you, and the finances, because I just believe out here in Dozell land, there's many of us who, all of us have life experiences. And I just think that if we put our experiences, there's a market for our experiences or our knowledge or our skill set. And there are book nerds everywhere. And if we make it appealing and market it correctly, people would want to read our product. And so I'm going to have them come on, and because Kim was a part of that process for Calvin, I want to do it when he's available to be here and just talk about putting putting a book together. And so that's what we want to do week after next. Next week we have scheduled Pastor Rhonda Thomas. Pastor Rhonda is the executive director of Faith in Florida, a nonprofit. It's a 501(c), but it also has a 504(c) component to it that allows it to actively do political work. But the 501(c) does is that's what I'm affiliated with. We do voter registration and civil. We organize against things that are not conducive to the majority of Floridians or local municipalities, or stop the violence. It's just organizing. And she also has an amazing story that leads to her telling what she's done. Pastor Rhonda was one of the ones who led the charge for Florida to allow convicted felons to vote in this state. And that was something that I thought we would never see in conservative Florida. I had absolutely no idea that Florida would go as far to the crazy right as Governor Despicable has taken it. We're just praying that in as much as um, um, Gillum, who lost to DeSantis in 2018, was only 30,000 votes short, and returning citizen population would have made that difference had he been available to run again this time. Um, we're praying that we can get somebody in office that can turn things around and make Florida a palatable state. Right now, I'm embarrassed when I traveled nationally. I was at a convention out of the state this past week, and I was just embarrassed talking. I was with people from Mississippi and Alabama, and just talking about how crazy Florida has become with its laws. We got to get Florida to where it is a darling of the South, a beautiful tourist attraction again, and not a place where you risk going to jail if you're a part of a protest and somebody drops a bottle and it breaks and you get arrested. They have just turned the laws and made them despicable. Or where you can't read about Harriet Tubman in the schools, or you can't read about George Floyd's situation, or you can't read about slavery. That's almost like un-American. And Pastor Rhonda is one of those who has the hope to not give in and not give up. And so next week she's going to talk about that. I know it's back to back. Yeah, we hope Senator Osgood can come and shed a lot of light tonight. And if she doesn't, then we'll get her another time. She was most gracious and willing to be in. She was unaware that her staff had overbooked her for the night. But anyway, we'll carry on. There's a lot of stuff going on. I'm resisting looking at the TV because there's a certain basketball game on that has a certain team that's located not too far from my house, and they're in game 5. It's a win and go home game for the Heat now. They're down 3-1 in the series to what looks like an insurmountable test. That Denver team is pretty tough. If the Heat can bring Dame Dollar on next year, so I don't mess up the name, they can get him in here next year. The Heat will contend with anybody. Won't have to have all of these miraculous series like they've had to get to this point. They can contend with the Denvers of the world or the LAs of the world. But they have a monumental task in winning tonight and continuing the series, getting it back here on, I think, Thursday night, and then trying to stay alive from there to push it to a game 7. So we'll see how that comes out. But there's a lot going on here just south of the border of my house. There's a certain ex-president who will, for the second time in less than 60 days, walk into a court of law where he will face an indictment, where he will, in effect, be arrested for 37 charges, including espionage in federal court this time. And remember, that's 2 indictments, two jurisdictions that has indictments. He has 2 other indictments likely coming. The January 6th insurrectionist case is still pending. And I thought the strongest of the 4 cases is the one in Georgia, where he interfered with an election by trying to get the Secretary of Election to interfere with the numbers. And that case is still pending. And of course, the governor and the state of Georgia, remember Georgia is the cradle of the South, they have tried to strip local district attorneys of their prosecutorial duties based on President Trump being in the crosshairs of the district attorney there. And it's just, the laws are just ridiculous in this nation now. I know a lot of things are going on and a lot of changes are taking place, but I never thought the voters' rights laws would be repealed. I never thought anybody would ever tamper with the right to vote, as it has happened in all of the states here in the South, in Texas. That lunatic out there it's ridiculous. So that's where we are. So tonight I want to talk about what's going to happen tomorrow as we wait on, hopefully in the next few minutes, we'll get to see Senator Osgood. Let's take a second. I'm going to have to qualify because I'm drinking. I'm drinking out of a cup. I am drinking grape drink. I would not dare drinking is not one of the things I do anyway. But I would not come on the show. Usually when I'm drinking water, I'm drinking out of a clear cup. I didn't have time. I had a lot of things going on. I'm drinking out of a cup, a throwaway cup, and I'm drinking grape drink, okay? So I needed a drink. And that's all it is. Usually I do that on the cover of another guest. When the camera's on another guest, I'll drink whatever I'm drinking, water or whatever, but tea. But tonight I'm doing this by myself for a while, so I just got moisten the throat. So President Trump is facing a federal indictment for some 37 charges, including espionage. And these charges are dealing with his handling of classified documents. Now, since these documents have been discovered, and since the Justice Department, first the archives, the federal archives, asked for the documents, and when they were not given over to them, then the Justice Department had to be brought involved, and they were lied to. Documents were moved in a deceitful effort to move them around and to conceal them. And one of the things that the ex-president, well, let me do it like they do on the stations, the twice impeached, once found liable for not sexual harassment, but something sexual, and indicted now twice in federal court and in the state of New York for tampering with documents. That president has asked people to move documents, to hide documents, to conceal documents. He has lied to prosecutors about the placement of documents, having possession of documents, and he is playing the victim. It's crazy. There's so many implications to this. What I'm about to say, I'm going to give the disclaimer. I've not lost my mind. But this I will say. I will go out and politic for Donald Trump if it was a choice of Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. When Trump became president, it was a state of shock and say, okay, I got to trust you on this one, God, that, we're not going to war or the country's not going to be sold out to Russia. But with DeSantis, I might have to move to Costa Rica somewhere. I just don't know if I could survive his presidency. He is pathetic, ridiculous. I would much rather have Trump than DeSantis. I'd rather have the current president, but if that changes, I cannot deal with a DeSantis presidency. I just can't do it. I'll go out and campaign for Chris Christie. Heck, I'll even campaign for the albino former vice president, Pence. But I will not. I cannot deal with DeSantis in the White House. That would just be the most miserable 4 years that would happen. But with that being said, we're watching to see just how this thing is going to play out, because the court case against President Trump in New York, that judge has told him emphatically, it doesn't matter what's going on nationally. And he was, of course, talking about the presidential election. It doesn't matter what's going on. Come March, that case was going to trial. There would be no delays or no continuances or anything of that sort. So if President Trump would be convicted, or Donald Trump was to be convicted in state court in the state of New York, he couldn't be pardoned if DeSantis was president, or if he was president. He couldn't, he cannot be pardoned from state. Can you believe that? The state, he cannot, the president cannot pardon him. But in federal court, if he is indicted on the more serious charges of espionage or those charges that Jack Smith just indicted him of, and the case is going to come out of Miami because that's where the documents were being mishandled. if he was in office or another Republican, they would have the opportunity to do just what we saw happen in 1968 when Gerald Ford, when Nixon resigned, made Ford president, and then Ford in turn, he in turn pardoned Nixon. Now, my feelings on that was because I lived through that period, and Nixon. Most people say that was a deal that was cut. Spiro Agnew had been indicted himself. He had resigned from the White House, and so Nixon brought Gerald Ford in as his replacement. And then when the heat became too great and it looked like he was facing an impeachment, and if Nixon had been impeached by the House of Representatives, which Trump has twice been, the Senate was all Democratic, and most Republicans would have voted to impeach President Nixon, and that had to remove him from office. That had never happened. Clinton has been impeached. Trump has been impeached twice, but neither of them lost their trial in the Senate. The Senate voted not to remove them from office. But without a doubt, President Nixon would have been removed in 1968 from office. Many of his Republican counterparts went to him and told him it was best for him to resign than have the stain on his legacy of being impeached. You know what the irony, I'm going way back in history, but the irony of that is that Nixon won the election by a landslide. What had happened was he was aware that they called them the White House plumbers, that members of former CIA leader Gordon Liddy pulled together a group who went in and broke into the Democratic National Headquarters across the street from the White House in the Watergate building to find secrets or whatever that the McGovern campaign was going to use. And it didn't matter. Nixon won the election by a real landslide. I think McGovern may have won 2 or 3 states. And then this came out after the election, and it evolved to Nixon leaving office. So Ford becomes president, and he hasn't warmed up the seat in the Oval Office yet before he goes in and he impeaches Nixon. Of course, in 1972, Jimmy Carter defeated him. And a lot of the reason that Ford was defeated was because he had pardoned Nixon. Now, I just looked at it the other day with all the stuff going on with Trump and all of these possibilities hanging in the wind. They played a lot of tape on. President Ford was a good and a decent man, and he was proven to be a decent president. He got accused of being clumsy because he slipped several times, bumped his head on the airplane door, but he was a good and decent man. But the single thing, Jimmy Carter was a very charismatic presidential candidate as governor of Georgia. But the thing that made it easy for him to beat Ford was that pardon hung over Ford's head, and everybody thought that it was something dirty in Denmark, that they had in fact cut a deal, that a deal had been cut, and that Nixon made Ford vice president with the intention that if he had to get out of Dodge, he would pardon him because those crimes were federal crimes, and he had the ability to pardon him, and that's what he did. Well, in this case, if Trump is indicted, if he is convicted of any of these 37 federal charges, the president of the United States can pardon him. But if he is indicted in New York or Georgia presses charges, not indicted, if he's convicted, and if he's indicted in Georgia, which I think is the strongest out of all of those 4 cases that loom, if he's indicted and then convicted in Georgia, in neither of those cases can Trump be pardoned. Now the governors of those states, and there is a Republican governor in Georgia, they would probably pardon him. But the governor of New York is not a Republican, and very rarely is there a Republican governor in Georgia. So Trump will be facing charges. Now, what we're hearing is that if Trump were convicted of these federal charges, remember he has another federal case pending. That is the June 6th insurrectionist case. That's proven to be a more and more stronger case, because everybody who was arrested in that case, not one person yet has been exonerated. Everybody has lost a court case. Either they lost in court or they pled guilty and took time. So it's looking like that's going to be an easy case for conviction there also. But that, again, is a federal case. If there's a Republican president, Trump could be pardoned from those charges. The other question is we ask is, if he is convicted on any of these charges, would an ex-president actually do jail time? That's I don't know what my YouTube people are saying, but that's what I would really like to see. Would like to get some responses from you all and see if that's what you would like to see. If you would like to see the president of the United States actually do jail time. And what the Republicans are running around crying about this time, they're saying that with the charges, and the charges are with the 37 charges, and almost each case has a maximum prison sentence of 20 years, and 37 charges are against him. In any three of those charges, if he was given the maximum, if he was convicted and given the maximum sentence, they've said it's tantamount to a death sentence. And I never thought of that. But there's a bigger question. Would we want to see a president of the United States, a former president of the United States, in prison? There certainly would be crazy logistic problems. That would be unprecedented. That has never happened. This is the first time that a president of the United States has ever been indicted on federal charges. So we're entering uncharted territory in all of these instances. Personally, and you may be surprised at me on this one, I would not want to see a president of the United States. Nobody knows what the intentions of Donald Trump are with some of those documents that he had. Now, if there was okay, so we got Senator Osgood is here, so we'll get back on Trump later on. I didn't see her. Let's Senator Osgood, please pop on. Let's bring her in. Senator Rosalind Osgood is with us. We are so happy. I hope you haven't been in the waiting room long. Senator, how you doing tonight?
I'm good, Pastor, and thank you so much for having me tonight. I'm sorry for my delay. I was on another Zoom hosting a legislative update forum talking about this whole issue of African American history, working really hard to dispel the rumor that you can't teach African American history in the state of Florida, when there's actually a law that's been on the books since 1994 requiring districts to teach African American history. And a bill filed this past legislative session, House Bill 551, by Representative Christopher Benjamin out of Miami, and Representative Corey Simon. Corey Simon is actually the first Black Republican elected to the Florida Senate. But this bill actually amends the earlier legislation and requires school districts to report what they're teaching as it relates to African American history, and to make sure that they're being held accountable. So it was a very impactful discussion with a lot of legislators. As you know, I'm an organizer for Faith in Florida as well, and we're doing a series this month, each Monday at 7 p.m. on various bills with legislators. Next Monday at 7, we will talk about the new election bill. Thank you so much for having me tonight. I'm excited to be with you. I do have one request that I'm going to put up front in exchange for me participating tonight. I need you to teach me how to play golf. I can play basketball really well. I got a strong jump shot. I know how to box out. But your girl needs to learn how to play golf. So,
well, Doc, let me tell you this. Our mutual friend who advised me that you were in the waiting room, Tim Griff, he's the resident pro amongst us. He is. I'll talk trash to him on any and every level of life, but when it comes to golf, I'm humble. I listen to him. I follow him. He's the man. He's the man.
So between the two of y'all, I'll learn.
Yeah, I'm getting there following him. So that would be great. Senator, I'm kind of caught in between. I don't know if I want to say Doc or Senator, because Doc, we're both preachers and we use that term, Doc, and you're actually a doc. What I want to do is we're right at the break. Let's do this. Let's do the break now. And let's come back. I want you to tell your amazing story. If you take a few minutes to tell your amazing story, and let's get into these laws from there. We can do that. If you don't mind.
I don't mind.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Madam Producer, let's do that break now. They're the ones who make a guy like me look good. If you can do that, man, you have performed a miracle par excellence. This is the time where we normally do a "Are you serious?" a dang dog, or a shout out. Madam Producer, I don't have any graphics, but I got to do a "Are you serious?" I'm sorry. I got to do this. Let's do this. We don't have any graphics, but I'm going to do it anyway. From Lindsey Graham to Governor Despicable, to the albino former vice president, to I won't call him Uncle Tom, but the other senator from South Carolina who we had the same color. That's about all. And for the former governor of South Carolina, Nikki Haley, and for the rest of you Republican clones, you Trumpites, you who have no guts, who stand up for nothing, are you serious? How in the world can you defend Donald Trump and compare him to anybody else on the planet when he's caught red-handed? You and I both know it was his intention to make money. He's already said that President Nixon sold his documents and earned $16 million. Are you serious? You're willing to stake your reputation? I'm through with it. I'm not even dealing with y'all. You guys are pathetic. Let me talk something constructive. Senator Osgood, I'm sorry. I'm not going to go off tonight. I'm not. Senator, if you could take up to 5 minutes, tell your amazing story to predicate where we're going tonight, please.
Certainly. Thank you again, Pastor Dozell. God has been so amazingly good to me. I have experienced the power of God in my life firsthand. 33 years ago, I lived homeless on the streets, battling with addiction, went to college, took the church break, started doing everything that I was big and bad enough to do, using drugs, selling drugs to use drugs, and ended up on the streets of Fort Lauderdale, homeless. And, sometimes like yesterday when it was raining, it puts things in perspective for me, because when you're homeless and it's raining, you got to kind of find a cardboard box and strategically position it under a tree so that the limbs from the tree can kind of break the water so that it doesn't flood your cardboard box out and get you wet. Because if you get wet, then you have to find, some way of getting clothing. And, as Black people became, more educated and moved to higher economic levels, we moved away from hanging clothes on the clothesline. So that would make it very difficult for a homeless person like myself to dress, because people, kind of was phasing out hanging clothes on the clothesline. But I eventually went to a place called BARC, which is still in existence. It's a free recovery treatment center here in Broward County. And from that to the 12-step programs of Alcoholics Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, for about, I would say 16 or 17 years, where I went and participated in those 12-step programs every day. And the 12-step programs had a major influence on my life, because it was through working those 12 steps that I was able to really turn my will and my life over to the care of God. I was raised Baptist and had gone to church all my life and knew of Christ, but was not in Christ. So it was through that process, December 2nd, actually, 1989, while sitting in the Volusia County Jail in a pair of orange khakis with no accessories, that I met God, I met Jesus for myself. And I was just so discombobulated. I mean, I had been up for 21 days. My hair literally looked like cobwebs. And I just, was very confused about the whole faith thing, church thing. I didn't understand, how God could be so kind, but then God was going to get me for every bad thing. My list of sins had become many by that time. And I recall very vividly trying to read what we call the Lord's Prayer. Those of us in theology, refer to it as the model prayer. And I couldn't read it when it was something that I had known from memory as a child. And it was at that time that I had a reckoning with myself. I realized that my life was unmanageable. I had not seen my kids probably in about 2 or 3 months at this time. And I just began to just ask God for help, just simply, God, if you out there, if you real, I need help. I can't stop using, I can't change my life. I need help. And I went to sleep that night and something unusual happens. Normally when I'm arrested and I go to jail and I'm on a binge, I sleep for 3 or 4 days. But I woke up the next morning to the guards coming in to tell me that they were releasing me to go from Volusia County back to Broward County to drug rehab at BARC, which was unheard of. But it was my sign that God had heard my prayer. And this time when I went back to BARC, I followed the rules. I did what they told me to do. I went to those meetings and I did everything but what I wanted to do. I had to totally surrender the way that I was living, my thought process. And let me just be clear. I grew up in a loving home with 2 wonderful grandparents. I was born to teen parents at a time when your last name actually meant something. At that time, the old folks were not going to let you go into foster care because of what your last name was. Somebody in your family was going to take you and raise you. And I'm just so grateful for my grandmother and granddaddy that took me in and didn't allow me to go into foster care. So I went to BARC and I was released. And, I had all these charges pending, 2 different charges actually in Broward and in Daytona. And I was able to stay clean one day at a time. I went to the 12-step program. I worked the steps. I, got a job. It was very hard to get a job. I remember at one point I was working tables, waiting tables at Denny's, doing telemarketing at AT&T. And I always had some kind of an entrepreneurial spirit. So I also had a cleaning business where I would go clean offices in the morning or at night. And I did that for a while until I was eventually able, after 5 years, to go back to school and went through this program called Voc Rehab that would give assistance to people in recovery that wanted to go back to school. So I went and I finished my bachelor's degree. I got a master's in public administration, a doctorate in public administration, and then eventually went back to seminary at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, ATS accredited school, and got a master's in divinity. And I can tell you, it has not been easy. There's many challenges when you are an addict or alcoholic in recovery. You're a Black woman with babies. It's a lot of stigma, a lot of hurtful things that people say. They prejudge you. But God is so faithful. His grace is certainly a grace that's beyond anything we could ever imagine, that he gives to us in the right measure, meaning based on how we need it. And God just continued to move in my life. I finally got this job in this teen parent center because the lady that was running the program was a FAMU graduate, and she saw that I had attended FAMU. I got pregnant the last semester, so I didn't graduate. But she saw that I had attended FAMU, and she gave me a job answering her phone. And it was kind of funny, Pastor Dozell, because at that time, my language wasn't very clean. I would use like 4-letter words, like after every few words. And they gave me like this little card that I had to read in order to answer the phone as a receptionist. So that was my first office job. It was in that job that I typed. I learned the magic of grant writing and how to deal with funders. And my life just continued to get better as long as I didn't pick up a drink or a drug. I was reunited with my kids. I came to understand that my kids didn't care as long as we were together. There were times it was hard for us, times that we were homeless. We had to sleep in the car. We went through a lot of ups and downs and struggles. I eventually got put on house arrest for those two charges concurrently. And so I'm on house arrest. I'm working. I have my babies. I'm going to meetings and I'm just trying to make it and trying to do the right thing. Eventually, I started going back to church and I met this prophet by the name of Dr. Matt King Carter. And it was something about this man that he had this love for the word of God and he could preach the word of God. And it was like it would sit right in my heart, right in my chest. And I would sit in the back of the church because I really didn't have church clothes. I had like jeans and t-shirts and whatever I could get at Bark on Wednesday when they allowed you to go to the thrift store. All of my money went to pay for my kids, the money that I had to pay for their daycare, although it was being subsidized, the clothes that they needed, and just trying to keep my head above water. Bark had given me an apartment because they had something, if you stay clean for 6 months, they'll pay your rent in your apartment for a year. So I went through all of those steps. I went back to school. I finally earned my master's where I was able to get a better quality job. From that, I started actually teaching at Nova. I worked at the American Red Cross for a while. After I got my master's, I didn't have to work the 3 jobs like I was working. I eventually got a job at the League of Cities, and they paid me enough money to just work for politicians and lobby on behalf of cities where I didn't have to wait the tables anymore. They kind of thought that, in a job like that, you couldn't do something like wait tables. But I was also selling Mary Kay at that time because I always had some kind of entrepreneurial thing working because I had 3 babies and just trying to make it with those babies. I eventually got married again and went through the whole process of the relationship, just trying to really get myself together and live right. But as I continued to go to church, I began to move from the back of the church to the front of the church. And our church is kind of like a one-stop shop. So I could go to church, go to Bible study, whatever. My kids could go to children's church, participate in different things. Like 7 nights a week, there was something going on at the church. And we could also eat for free because with the food stamps I was getting at that time, we oftentimes only had enough to just kind of make it, so I had to manage the meals. But once I got my master's, it allowed us to come up. I remember crying when they took away my free lunch until I realized that it was actually a blessing and not a curse because now I didn't need it. They could give it to someone that needed. And I just continued to trust God and move forward. And I come to understand that every time there was an obstacle put in my life, it also created a multiplicity of opportunities for God to demonstrate himself in my life. I have a better appreciation when the Bible talks about knowing God using these different Greek words, oido, which means to know God intellectually, and kenosko, which Paul talks about a lot, to know God through experience. So God continued to bless my life. I eventually left the League of Cities because Dr. Carter wanted me to come and run the nonprofit at the church, MODCO, Mount Olive Development Corporation, in which I currently still serve as the CEO for 22 years. Just so grateful for Dr. Carter giving me the opportunity, allowing me to grow in the position, to work with other people who are coming off the streets, people that are dealing with health issues, people that are returning citizens, those members of our family that are oftentimes marginalized and overlooked. God has given me an opportunity to serve them and to be an influence in their life as he leads me to do so. Eventually, I was just tired of all the failing schools in the community. And on a prayer line, doing a study of Nehemiah, God revealed to me that education was the wall that had been broken down in our community, and that I was kind of sitting around whining and complaining instead of getting involved and being a part of the solution. So I ran for school board, and out the gate, of course, opponents sent out all kind of nasty literature about my past, but I had kind of already written a book about it called The Story Behind the Story that gave snapshots of it. So I've always been very open about my story because it is the true transformative power of God and how God can reach way, way down and pick anyone up. And it's also biblical because the Bible tells us that we overcome by the blood of the Lamb, and what you hear us talk about all the time. But the other part of that phase is in the power of our testimony. And it's through my testimony and the power of God working in my life that God allows me to use to have an influence and an impact in so many other people's lives as I live as a living epistle or a living word that I'm able to talk and interact with people in an authentic and genuine way to let them know that life is better, when you're a believer. Life is better when you authentically live in your truth. And your experiences when you're at a table, especially making policy, is something that no one can take away from you when you have those real life experiences. So I served on the school board for 9.5 years, led the school board during the time of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting, when a lot of the minority kids that were in that school was being overlooked. Then ended up being the chair of the school board during the coronavirus pandemic, and got into this massive fight with the powers to be in Tallahassee about the mask mandate and them not wanting people to be protected with masks, but me being certain that we needed to use masks as a tool. So that became a very public political battle that put me front and center on media across this nation. I mean, I got emails from Africa, from all kind of countries and different people. Some were very good and some were very unkind. As an elected official, you take a lot of hits, you get bullied a lot. People say very hurtful things. They lie on social media, they lie in their newspaper, and you just have to really stay focused. And I decided to leave the school board after Mr. Runcie left the district and go to the Senate. I actually got a call. It's always something that I'm doing that a door is opening for me. The Bible is just so true when it says your gift make room for you. You don't have to oftentimes seek things out. The doors are just open for you.
Right.
So I just finished my first legislative session in the 2023 during the 2023 legislative session. And it was a great session for me. I had a lot of wins, learned a lot, did a lot of hard work, had a lot of great people that stayed connected. And so I'm just really, really grateful. If you want to know more about that story in more details, I often preach about it. The book, The Story Behind the Story, is on Amazon. It gives more snapshots. But I'm just grateful to be here tonight to be a part of this discussion.
Doc, if you need to go and get a copy of that and we get that to the producer so we can get a picture of what we want to do, that we definitely want people to see it and know about that. We definitely, your story is awesome, and you can't snap it in a few minutes here on this show. Doc mentioned Faith in Florida, and we're colleagues now, and that's my blessing. But I'm just inspired. You reach a certain age in life and you say, okay, you've listened to I Have a Dream and Keep Hope Alive, and you think the inspiration, but Senator Osgood just, and I'm really not kissing up, but I was just at our Orlando convene. I had never heard the story. I heard snippets of it there, but it was your teaching of the gospel that just blessed me beyond measure. And I've seen you, and I've seen the work that you've done. And you talk about Dr. Carter. You are, ma'am, a social prophet, a prophet of social justice that God has put in our midst. And I'm just grateful is not the word to say that to sit under your leadership and to be a contemporary of you. We're so grateful for what you do. I got to ask you this about Dr. Carter now, and we want to respect our brother in his absentia. Were you called to ministry under Dr. Carter?
So it's an interesting story. So I was the president of the matrons. I thought because Pat Carter, his wife, thought that I was a genius. But I realized that I was one of the few women in the church between the ages of 18 and 35 that had a husband. And it was their way of trying to teach me how to dress better, to be more of a mother. I'm tomboyish, kind of rough around the edge. They still haven't gotten into the shiny church clothes. So she made me the president of the matrons. And during that time that I served as the president of the matrons, I followed Angela Williams, who is just an awesome woman of God in her own right. And it required that I do an annual address. So I would go and give my little speeches. I grew up very shy as a kid, don't like public speaking, very undesirable, a lot of bullying, Miss Banana, Miss Pancakes. So I don't, like public speaking, but my work requires me to do it. And so this particular year, I gave my little speech in February down at a church in Palm Beach, and I talked about the Lamentations of Jeremiah. So at the same time, I knew that God wanted more for me. I was in the doctorate program. I had all this great stuff going on. So I spent a lot of time with Dr. Carter in church. I was there like 7 nights a week, serving and volunteering around the church. So we was having this conversation, and I was telling him that God wanted more from me. And he said, just like he normally does. So then he came back and he called me and said that I needed to go to seminary. I said, I just finished all this schooling. I don't want to go to seminary. I can't take out no more student loans. He said, yeah, I'm going to license you the third Sunday in December. I'm like, license me to do what? You've been talking about a missionary. I got a husband. I can't go to leave my husband and kids. And so he licensed me and positioned me in the pulpit. And he said that God had been dealing with his heart since he heard me speak in February, that he knew that God wanted me to share the gospel, that God wanted more from me. And it was kind of mind blowing to me because I've been going in and out of Mount Olive since I was 7. They don't do women preachers in the Baptist. It's just not the way they get down, the way they roll. So he licensed me and put me in the pulpit. And I just always followed him around. God would use him to preach. Sometimes I would plan that I'm going to go home and shoot my husband, and Dr. Carter would preach, and then I would have to go home and tell my husband I'm sorry for the way I cut up on the way to church. So I knew that God was using Dr. Carter to speak to me. So whatever Dr. Carter said to me, I was going to do. So I enrolled in seminary that August. He chose the seminary, and he also got the church to give me a grant to pay for the seminary. It was the first degree that I didn't have to pay for. But now I'm going to a Southern Baptist seminary where they still want the rights to own slaves, and they don't believe women should preach. Dr. Carter say, you're not there for that. So I did that habit program. Some of it was done, where they had the instructor on TV, and then I would have to go there during the summer for the week. But it kind of shook up the whole Baptist thing when he licensed me and position me in the pulpit. You always have some good Baptists that are complaining. So they start complaining about me following Dr. Carter around, about me doing communion and funerals and stuff, and I wasn't ordained. So then he came back and ordained me after, kind of telling the church off and saying Spurgeon was never ordained, that ministers serve at the discretion of the pastor. Now, Dr. Carter was also having some health challenges. So a lot of times I would be the only one that was trained to do whatever he needed me to do. If he needed me to preach, 5 minutes before the time, I was always prepared because I spent a lot of time with him writing manuscripts, training, studying the word. And when I tell you, Pastor Dozell, it was brutal. I mean, he would read one paragraph and tear up a whole 7 pages of a manuscript and just kind of go off. People don't want to hear this. You got to do this. You got to read. Go back and read 10 more books. And I'm like, oh my God, you got to understand the Hebrew and the Greek. You got to do this. And I mean, Dr. Carter had no gender preference. It wasn't no kind of cushion because you a girl. Even he taught me even right down to what shoes to wear in the graveyard or not. We don't have time for you to get your heel out the ground while we're going to plant somebody. And then Burrell was also the minister of congregational care. So he would have me tag along with Reverend Burrell as well. And Reverend Burrell was from Virginia. So he openly embraced women preachers. So that's how I got a lot of my training through Dr. Carter and sitting with him and just watching him. There were times we would go to conventions and he would be hanging out with people like Charles Booth and Dr. Robert Smith Jr., like the heavy hitters. I would just be the girl carrying Dr. Carter's bag. Yeah. But I would listen at those conversations. I would laugh. And I just learned so much from gleaning from him. And he would have these meetings at our church. And, everybody else was too busy. I was going to be in the meeting with Dr. Carter, training, asking questions, and learning. And today I'm just so grateful for him and what he poured into me as a preacher and him giving me the job at Modco. And it's funny because, people say to me, oh, we was looking for Dr. Carter's sons in the ministry, but it's a daughter in the ministry. So now I pride myself on saying I'm the only preacher in the whole wide world that can say I'm the daughter in the ministry of Dr. Matt King Carter and Dr. D. Davidson.
Wow. I had no idea. I thought that your ministry actually started this formation after Dr. Carter was after he retired. This is unbelievable. Now, I might as well just say we won't get to politics tonight, Doc. I just got to book you for another time to talk about that. We're going to stay right here. I, too, am a reluctant graduate of a Southern Baptist Seminary. In fact, Burrell and I both went to Southern. And my criteria for a seminary was that it had to be accepting of women pastors when it came time for me to go, women preachers. And at the time I went to Southern was. I really wanted to go to Union so I could study under James Cone, and I got a chance to meet with him. And I can't remember what's the name of the Southern required, but it's the entrance exam for seminary, like the law school, the entrance exam. And he told me that I needed to score such and such. And when I went in to take the test, I sat down and looked at the test, said, well, I'll be going to Southern in the fall. I won't be going to Union. But so I go to Southern, and we go through that whole process. And then as Burrell and I were coming out there, and they got back to their true roots and cut out the women and all of that stuff. But the work goes on. I heard you say the other day, and I wanted to talk to you about this. I heard you say that you have met resistance as a woman in ministry. Is that still in the case? I was shocked, and I think you left early because I was looking for you to talk to you about that. I thought that was kind of out of the door in this day and time, particularly in the Black church. But I was shocked to hear you say this. Am I wrong about that? That's not true.
It is true. I did leave early. I had to go to Jacksonville to get my grandbaby because it's my month of Nana duties. But, there is still resistance. When you are a Black woman in ministry, a preacher, you always have to work harder to, make sure that your delivery is of par. There are still some churches that are just not with women preachers. Dr. Carter, before he passed away, would have these conversations and say, how can any of us accuse God of biological malfeasance? He said, I had to grow out of my ignorance. And a lot of, before I was licensed and ordained, I used to get a lot of little speaking engagements, during women's conference time and different things in churches. And once I became licensed and ordained and was kind of put out there because I was, Dr. Carter licensed and ordained me. And a lot of times he would have health problems. So, he would call me 10 minutes before church and I had to preach. I had to be ready to go. And it kind of gave me a lot of exposure. And then I started getting some invitations, but there are still some who still don't, believe women should carry the gospel, don't allow women to preach in their pulpit. And what I do is I never deal with that. I'm an associate minister. I won't even get into a conversation with the pastor about whether women should preach or not. I respect pastors too much. I think that those are conversations that pastors need to have with other pastors. I just know what God means to me, how he's radically transformed my life, how I've experienced the power, the supernatural power of the Holy Spirit. And I can't keep it to myself. I'll tell it wherever I go, however I need to tell it. I get in trouble sometimes in politics because people like to say separation of church and state. Well, I'm filled with the Holy Spirit. I can't take it off in the morning and put it on. So wherever I go, the Holy Spirit is with me. God is with me. And because I'm in Christ, my life is centered around him. He's the driving force of my life. So he's often a part of my conversation, whether I'm talking about legislation or whether I'm talking about something else. And I do believe, Pastor Dozell, that he's given me a unique gift to look at the stories of the women in the Bible. Their stories are oftentimes told through a very male chauvinistic perspective.
Yes.
And God allows me to see the strength and power of the women in the Bible. I told you about my first book, The Story Behind the Story. I'm in my office. I don't have a copy of it here. But I wrote a second book after battling with cancer called Influential Woman Leader. and it talks a little bit about Black women in leadership. And I wrote it after I had this 2-year battle of cancer because I was working myself to death and not taking care of myself. So it talks about the importance of leading yourself first, getting rest, making sure you're mentally healthy. And I'm actually working on a 3rd book right now called Leadership Moments. There's been opportune times and moments that God has positioned me in leadership. Like I became the president of my Alpha Kappa Alpha chapter and COVID hit. And all of my ministerial training, my training as a chaplain was needed at that time to carry that organization. So there is still a resistance, not only just being a preacher, but being a Black woman in leadership. I mean, when we think about this, we saw last week AJ Owens get murdered in Orlando. AJ Owens is a young lady that grew up in the New Mount Olive Baptist Church, was a very consistent part of our youth ministry along
I did not know she was from here.
Yes, with my kids. And we've seen so many times Black men be gunned down and shot down. Now we're seeing it happen to Black women. While simultaneously we have the first African-American woman as Vice President of the United States. We have the first African-American woman on the Supreme Court as a justice. So we see women, Black women, making some significant strides into major positions. First, Black woman CEO of Walgreens, but simultaneously there is a backlash. So in our resistance to the status quo, we oftentimes pay a price financially, mentally, and physically if we're not in touch with God in a way that we have the supernatural courage to trust God and the humbleness to open ourselves up and be vulnerable and speak about the reality of what we live in and build community. The superpower for Black women is the sisterhood. Black women supporting and looking out for each other, because a Black woman will what? Cut you about what? They children and they man, right? So we pay the heavy price. The burden of this world, the weight is literally on our shoulder. April Ryan writes this piece about a Black woman will save the world, a very, very powerful book. As she tells her story and the other stories of Black women, you see, I got all my sticky notes when I've been reading this book. It's a very, very powerful book about the price you pay as a Black woman in leadership, where you deal with the microaggressions of your voice trying to be silenced, or, people just ignore you and those kinds of things. Those are all real realities, especially when you do what I do as a preacher. You're in public life, and then, God has blessed me to get 5 degrees. So some people just look at me and they come to all kind of conclusions. They have no idea what it's like to literally be so messed up on drugs that I remember I could move into an abandoned apartment and the rats and roaches would move next door because they didn't want to live with me. So God has radically transformed my life. So what I do it from an authentic place of love for God and love for my community. So people a lot of times don't know your story. They make all kind of judgment calls. And I'm also kind of protective. I can't, put myself, when the Bible say, lead me not to temptation. God has been good to me, but I'm straight from the ghetto. So I know I could pop off. So I have to navigate and make sure that I'm not positioning myself in a situation where it's going to make me embarrass God and embarrass the community. So it's a constant life of spiritual disciplines. I'm very disciplined. I'm on a prayer line every morning. I'm at church. I was having to fly 300 miles from Tallahassee to be at church. I need to hear my pastor's voice. I need to hear that word of God so that I can get what I need, so that my heart, as a woman, a man thinketh in his heart, so is he, so that my thinking is clear and that I'm staying rooted and grounded. So it's a lot of work on self and spiritual disciplines to do the multiplicity of things that I do from day to day.
Doc, the clock, and I think I've known you from a distance, but my first real encounter of hearing you, indeed, you do a masterful job of taking the womanist point of view and from those biblical stories of women in the Bible. and that was what you did, I think, with Deborah there in Orlando, and it really was captivating to me, and I was just awed by it. The clock slapping us right upside the head. What I'm wondering is, my brother, we do this show together. He has just taken on a new position, and I'm waiting for him to be available to talk about his position. So I won't have him as a co-host as much. But what I would like to do, we're going to discuss. I'm sure you're aware of the shooting of, it was one of my former members over at Mount Bethel, was shot in Palm Beach County about a month ago now, and I'm close to that family. We're going to look at that, and we're going to look at that young lady shooting, and we're going to look in depthly at it. And what I'm not going to do is put you on the spot as a senator and have you comment on those cases. But I just want to talk about have you come in on talk about the gun law. Kim is retired GSO, and he brings that to the table. And he and I kind of have different views about gun, but we share them on this show. But so I would just like to bring you on when I can coordinate the two of you all in the next month at least, and discuss those cases. But I want to have you on. We'll just talk about the gun law with you, and then he and I'll talk about the case. Can we get you to do that? Then we'll talk to Senator Osgood on that night. We're talking to Dr. Osgood tonight.
Certainly, Pastor Dozell. Anytime you want me, I'm willing to coordinate. These kinds of forums are so very important. And it's an honor just to be in your presence. You're one of the most brilliant, men that I know. I watch you from afar, your depth of knowledge on issues and subjects and how you keep our community informed. I really, really admire that. I was thinking all day, oh man, I'm going big time night. I'm going to be on with Pastor Dozell.
You're killing me, Doc.
Anytime that we can coordinate, I'm here. As a senator, we make laws, but we can certainly speak about issues. And a lot of times, how these shootings are politicized. When we talk about the Orlando shooting, and I'm going to wrap up, I actually think the sheriff did a good job in the way that he did the pre-investigation that won't allow this lady to get off in the end, that he took his time, got the witnesses, established everything he needed to establish, and then went and arrested her. That's going to really pay off in the end. So just let me know I'm here. Your producer has my direct contact information. All she has to do is text me, and I'll have my staff help me make sure I don't drop the ball. And thank you so much for thinking of me and giving me this opportunity. I just thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Dr. Osgood, I am eternally honored to have you here tonight. I've had some candidates for statewide offices and others, but this is my honor tonight to have a sister amongst us who is real and raw, but yet polished and disciplined, and can tell his story however it needs to be told. God bless you and thank you. And we're going to be trying to put this together in the short term. You're going to be followed by another great sister, Pastor Varner, next week.
All right. Yes, my boss. Thank you so much again. And thank you to the producer for doing an amazing job.
Thank you, Dr. Osgood. And we're going to plug everything you've ever written or thought about written. We're going to make sure we plug it here when you come back to us. Thank you so much, and God bless.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Hey, I wish Kim was here to sum this up tonight. As I see it, we had a living testimony amongst us tonight. I mean, a living testimony. You see what a brilliant sister Dr. Rosalind Osgood is. Let's keep the politics out of it. Let's just deal with her story, her realism, her commitment to God's people, to uplifting the least, the last, and the left out, and her discipline and her attention to detail. As sharp as her mind is, she has 5 degrees. I did not know Dr. Osgood had actually been in seminary and gone to one of the better ones in the nation. Like Dr. Carter I'm sure he told the same thing he told me when I left to go to a Southern Baptist seminary. I went there with a grudge, left there with a grudge, still have one, but I'm grateful for the message, because Dr. Carter told me, he said, you take what they teach it and you dip it in chocolate. And that's what we've been able to do. This is how we see it. Thank God for Dr. Rosalind Osgood and her humility and her willingness to come back. She'll be back with us when my cohort in crime, when Kim KB will be back with me, hopefully in the next 3 or 4 weeks. God bless you. We'll see you next week. Dialogue with Dozell.